Wait a moment.
Recording in progress.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us live on the first program of the month with PSU Open Mobility 2022. And this afternoon, our invited speaker is going to cover the topic of researching global Englishes. And for today's session, we have Dr. Pariwat Thara Reddy here as our moderator, and I do appreciate his contribution today. Dr. Thara Reddy has taught English courses at Prince of Central University for more than 10 years, actually. He currently teaches postgraduate and undergraduate courses emphasizing the development of 4 English language skills. He holds a PhD in applied linguistics from the University of Auckland and a master's degree in TESOL from the University of Edinburgh. His research interests include language teacher cognition and global Englishes. Now, let's wait no longer, and I will let Dr. Thara Reddy take over the microphone.
Thank you very much, Associate Professor Dr. Yusuf. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the session Research Global Englishes. Today, we will explore what research has been conducted in the field of global Englishes. I have the honor of introducing our guest speaker, who is a leading scholar in the field. So Nicola Galloway is a senior lecturer, publication lead, program lead for the Master of Science, Master of Education, TESOL at the University of Glasgow. She is an applied linguist with an interest in the pedagogical implications of the use of English as a global lingua franca and the internationalization of higher education in non-Anglophone context. Her work is mainly in the growing subfield of global Englishes and English medium instruction in higher education. She has published extensively on this topic, including 7 books, 16 chapters, 4 research reports, and 23 articles, which is quite impressive. Forthcoming books include one on the internalization of higher education and a new research handbook of teaching English as an international language. We will certainly benefit from her talk, and she will kindly answer any question at the end of this talk. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Associate Professor Dr. Nicola Galloway. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the lovely introduction. Let me just give me one moment to share my screen. Does that all look okay on your side? Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone. Traditional EL. Despite the numerous barriers to incorporating a global Englishes perspective into the ELT classroom, particularly the prevalence of native speakerism, the dominance of standard language ideology, we have had flourishing interest in the pedagogical implications of global Englishes research, and recent years have also seen a number of classroom-based studies and also studies in teacher education as well. So today I'm going to give you an overview of some of the studies that have been done with a focus on, sorry, I still have a little bit of a cold, with a focus on research in global Englishes. So in part 1, I'll give you an overview of some of the studies that have been conducted. And then in part 2, we'll look towards directing global Englishes research and what research directions we should perhaps take. And I'll open the floor for questions. So just a little recap for those of you that were here yesterday, some of you may not have been here. In yesterday's lecture, we covered the global Englishes umbrella paradigm. We looked at world Englishes research, so the focus on inner, outer, expanding circle Englishes, the identification and codification and legitimization of regional varieties of English, and also the pedagogical implications of this research within and looking at the various communicative strategies that ELF users use when they're communicating using English as a lingua franca. And again, the associated pedagogical implications, so ELF-aware pedagogy. I also introduced the EIL paradigm emerging from North America, so more with a focus on the implications of the spread of English and on teaching. And I introduced Global Englishes as well, that aims to be an inclusive research paradigm that also resonates with developments in the field of second language acquisition, namely multilingualism, translanguaging, the multilingual SLA, and calls for a paradigm shift away from a monolingual perspective in SLA. So very similar to calls for change in ELT. We also look, and I mentioned the theory-practice divide, and this was really what interested me back in my PhD when I was exploring this as well, that at the theoretical level, there was an increasing body of work showcasing the diversity of English, a lot of calls for change, but nobody was telling teachers what to do. So my first research fields into what I termed the GELT proposals, the Global Englishes Language Teaching proposals. And there was six, I can't see here for the, let me just reduce, I can see all the speakers here. We had 6 main proposals for change. Number 1, increasing exposure to the diversity of English, emphasizing respect for multilingualism. As I mentioned yesterday, today, multilingualism, not monolingualism, is the norm. Raising awareness, having a critical approach to ELT as well, encouraging our students to think about the impact of English in their context, the global spread of English, the politics of English, raising awareness of how ELF users communicate successfully, diverse cultures and identities, and also this real need to change hiring practices as well. And I mentioned that I've also been active over the last, 2011, so 12 years over the last decade in implementing a number of different studies to try and implement some of these proposals as well. Some scholars in the field as well have also gone beyond this and created frameworks to help instigate this paradigm shift as well. And I do think we need more research that investigates the usefulness of these frameworks. In World Englishes, we have World Englishes Informed ELT, the EIL Curriculum Blueprint that I presented yesterday, ELF-aware pedagogy, Englishes language teaching as well. And we can see here that scholars in all of these fields have created these frameworks that aim to help instigate this paradigm shift and help incorporate a more global Englishes or English as an international language perspective into the classroom. Again, researchers within these fields may position their work in different fields, different methodological approaches. The frameworks may differ. However, they all share the same similar underlying ideology in the need to move away from this monolingual native speaker perspective of English in the ELT curriculum. So part 1 then. The studies I'm going to draw on in part 1 come from the systematic review that I conducted with Heath Rose and Jim McKinley. Now, there's a number of other studies that had been empirical articles here. We shortlisted 58 empirical articles, so we could see a real interest in global Englishes over the past decade and a number of studies. 8 of these made the cut, if you like, and they were given in-depth critical reviews. This systematic review revealed that there was a real lack of longitudinal designs, and this is a real issue if we want to use this evidence, these research findings to inform curriculum innovation. So we had more single shot studies in a classroom over maybe one semester or over a few lessons, for example. So there's a real need for more longitudinal research. We also found that, and this isn't supposed to be a criticism of this research because it's evidence that this is a growing research paradigm, gaining interest, and researchers are doing research in their own classrooms as well. Action research is often criticised as well, and just because a teacher is doing research in their own classroom does not mean that can't be rigorous. And we very much need more action research studies working with teachers as well in their own classrooms. But what we did find in these studies is that there was a lack of systematic methods and reliable research approaches. So a lot of the claims made in the conclusions of these studies were not reliable based on the data and the research design as well. There was also a real underrepresentation of contexts outside of university language classrooms. Perhaps this is because teachers have more access to working with research in university context, but no real studies in the primary school context, elementary school context. And this is quite concerning. Obviously, access to participants is more challenging with young learners, but stereotypes form very early. So I would call for more research with elementary and junior high school students as well in these contexts. So the research questions that guided our study here were: what global English's innovations have been trialled and reported? Which ones have been conducted in language classrooms? And how has technology been used as a facilitator of curricular innovation? And I would imagine in the last 2 to 3 years, we're going to see a flurry of technology-based global English studies as well. This, if you're interested in doing a systematic review, I might be a little biased here. I've put a nice example of a systematic review, but I do think it's a nice example, and I think we clearly present how to conduct a systematic review here. You can have a look through the abstract and the introduction for an overview of global Englishes as well. We define global Englishes research paradigms, the methodology, and we also outline some future directions as well, which I'll touch on today. So, as I mentioned then, there was a lack of longitudinal research. We also found that there was an underuse of direct measures to explore the effects of classroom interventions. So quite often we had retrospective studies. So an intervention would be introduced in the classroom, a global English's intervention, and then retrospectively the attitudes were measured. So we didn't really, there was a lack of pre and post test measurement. As I mentioned, a lack of research outside of university context and a real need for more robust methodological designs. If we want to convince people that global Englishes has a positive impact on our students, that it's an improvement on the status quo, on the traditional current English language teaching curricula, then we need believable research. We need sound research findings that we can present to a range of stakeholders as well. So while it's fabulous that this growing body of research is emerging and we see that global English really has taken off, I think that it's time to take stock of the research that's emerging and work together in the field to shape this research and the design as well. So let's just have a little look at some of the studies then in this review. So we had a look, first of all, at research into innovations in teacher education. Now, it's important to note here that this systematic review did not look at attitudes to global Englishes. So attitudes towards the concept in general, or attitudes to innovations. We did gather that research, and I'm writing that up as a different systematic review on attitudes to innovations. But here in this article, we only reported on the actual innovations. So this was innovations in teacher education research, and we can see there's been a lot in the last few years, particularly since 2019. And I think this is indication of global English is really gaining in popularity in the last few years. We can see here that a lot was done with both in-service and pre-service teachers as well. And a number of the different paradigms were used here. Let's take a closer look at some of the examples there. Some studies reporting on reflections, some on, now there was a lack of longitudinal interventions, but we did find some. And some have also looked at some of the frameworks, so teachers' attitudes towards the proposals for change as well. So the first one here is Islami et al. And the aim here was to challenge pre-service teachers' knowledge of world Englishes, increase their sensitivity towards the diversity of English before they enter the American school system. So back here, we can see it's this study here in the USA. I don't know if you can see my cursor here or not. So this innovation then was with practitioner researchers designed 6 activities to promote world Englishes and EIL. And they used written reflective journaling. So that was not reported in the study. And we have found that in some places that some aspects of the research studies were not always reported in detail. This study concluded that the activities were good at raising awareness of global Englishes, improved tolerance towards different varieties of English, and respect of world Englishes in general. And the researchers also claimed that this resulted in some attitudinal change towards standard ideologies. However, as I mentioned, it's difficult to claim attitudinal change if we don't have pre and post course attitudinal research. Again, this is not a criticism. I'm just trying to point out some of the methods that are being used and some of the methods or designs that we perhaps need to use in the field. One was in the Thai context. So our own Denchai here. Down at the bottom here in 2000. And the aim here was to investigate attitudes towards global Englishes language teaching and teacher training. As we know, the teacher training was identified as a main barrier as well to incorporating a global Englishes perspective into the classroom. And we've seen a lot of global Englishes courses introduced in Masters and Applied Linguistics TESOL courses around the world in recent years. So Denchai here designed a 6-hour teacher development course, and this was underpinned by transformative learning theory. This is also a theory that's been used by ELF-aware researchers as well. So I think Yasmin and Nicola as well. Denchai did include pre- and post-course questionnaires here, researcher field notes, and different artifacts as well produced by the participants. So we had a range of methods in this study. The sample size was reported, so there was 38 Thai English teachers, and this was lower secondary school as well. So again, we see a study conducted outside of the university context. However, the conclusions were there was no major change in attitudes towards global Englishes. But again, perhaps we have to consider, is 16 hours enough as well? So perhaps we need an even more longitudinal study here. Teachers did have a willingness to learn new concepts. I'll come back to this in the last part of the lecture and work with teachers. And also, Denchai concluded that there's a need for activities that promote a strong emotional response to question their existing knowledge. So again, this relates to the dominance of standard language ideology as well. And we have these long-held beliefs in how English should be learned and how it should be taught. Another study, so this was my own with my research assistant, Takuya. We looked here at attitudes towards the GELP framework. So a lot of proposals, as I mentioned, have been put forward for change. And so we wanted to ask our pre and input forward for change, what did they think of the GELT framework? And as I mentioned, we have the different frameworks for change, but very little research has been conducted on the usefulness of these frameworks. We had pre and post-course questionnaires and pre and post-course interviews. So this was a quasi-experimental design, and the intervention was the Global Englishes course. 47 questionnaires, 21 interviews, and this article was written up in TESOL Quarterly. That GELTs was seen to be relevant by the sure about how to overcome them. And our conclusion was here then that they need more guidance for practitioners. So even though we've had this movement in the field from theorizing about the need for change to the GELT proposals, to creating frameworks for change and also some materials, our student teachers, our future teachers still need more guidance. So that was our main conclusion here. We also had a number of studies that have been conducted with students in the language classroom as well. So here, I think, is it 17 studies in Asia, a lot in Japan, and also in a university context as well. I'll give you a moment just to look at this. And again, we can see a real increase in study from around 2018 again. So again, evidence that in the last 4 or 5 years, Global Englishes has really gathered momentum. And I'm sure you recognize some of the names here. Some of these studies then reported on classroom insight into what teachers are doing in classrooms. So it's a really good insight into how different people are incorporating this. Some studies also reported on out-of-class learning activities. So I had my own back in 2014 with the listening journal activity. And studies are also reporting on how to teach World Englishes and EIL. So let's look at this first study then. So CERT and OSCAN. So that one was down the bottom here, 2020. That was in Turkey. So the aim of this study then was to enable students to experience ELF-informed activities. So you can see here that research fields within what I would call Global Englishes. So this was an ELF-aware pedagogy activity. They wanted to challenge students' existing beliefs about English-informed ELF activities. So again, we see another way of how to do this. And there was pre and post-course data collection, and this was via a list of agree, disagree statements, and also semi-structured interviews. And it wasn't clear to me here if the interviews were done at both at the start and the end of the course. The sample was 30 students, and the study concluded that the activities gave students greater confidence in the use of their own variety of English. They had less attachment to native standards, and it suggests a preference to standard English for some, maybe due to norm-based approaches. Now, this relates to my own work on attitudes back in my PhD in 2007 to 11. I looked at students' attitudes towards English, and my conclusion was that most of the studies were using quantitative approaches and concluded that students had positive attitudes towards native English. And this also resonated with their attitudes towards ELT. They had positive attitudes towards native English and positive attitudes towards native norms and native speaking teachers in ELT. And a lot of the research studies at this time were concluding similar results. And also a hierarchy within native English, students, American English, British English. I wanted to problematize this further, so I used focus groups and more qualitative methods to explore where these norm-bound attitudes come from. And as in this study here, my conclusion was that it came from familiarity with native English, that this was the norm, this was the one they were exposed to as well. And familiarity can impact on attitudes as well. So perhaps then if we incorporate a more global English perspective into the classroom, then attitudes, positive attitudes will lessen towards these native standards. We also saw a number of out-of-class learning activities. So this was my own listening journal activity. I recently told my activity, and one of my Turkish students didn't mean it wasn't successful. And this was an excellent point, because even unsuccessful studies are still telling us something. So in this study, I wanted my students, and it's similar to the example that Assoc gave yesterday about sending his students to Phuket to expose them to using ELF and getting them to reflect. My students were only in Japan university, were only exposed to native English in the university in their IELTS TOEIC tests, but they were using English as a lingua franca outside of campus in their part-time jobs. So I wanted them on a weekly basis to either listen to a speaker of a different variety of English, and I gave them lots of resources, or reflect on this. What I found was, when analysing the journal entries, now this was a long time ago, it wasn't electronic, they were handwritten journals. They were particularly drawn to Kakru's expanding circle. So this was the varieties that they chose. And they did raise their awareness of the diversity of English. However, some stereotypes were also reinforced. They maintained that they disliked Indian English, for example, and the more that they listened, the more they seemed to dislike this variety. I also found that my students didn't have the metacognitive ability to reflect on their ELF experiences as well. I hadn't taught them how to do this or how to reflect. So that, in my opinion, it was unsuccessful in certain ways because it reinforced stereotypes, but it did tell me something as well. So we can come back to that. Another study here was Ali.
Seminar just for the certificate. No, this have no conduct, no research on just.
Dr. Nicola, can I interrupt you?
This study was with postgraduate students, and it was in Pakistan. Oh, wait a moment. So Ali's study was conducted in Pakistan, and he wanted to explore the effects of a series of EIL workshops. So they had 5 workshops on EIL, and during the workshops, there was fieldwork observation notes, document collection, and post-study interviews. And they used grounded theory to analyze the data. So again, what we're getting a sense of is all the different approaches that researchers in the field are using, as well as the activities that they're introducing and what these activities look like. So we can learn a lot from these studies. The study concluded that the intervention did challenge students' ideas of standards, but there was still these deficit self-perceptions, and this was due to the education system. So again, these norm-bound attitudes due to how English is approached in the education system. And post-colonial ideas in this context as well were a real barrier. And this idea that they may not be seen as a native speaker as well. So we see real context-specific findings in this study. So here then, this is some of the research conducted in the classrooms. Some of them are quasi-experimental. So post-course with an intervention and using a variety of methods. We have some action research projects, some case studies, but a real lot, a lot of action research. And this is something I think we really need to focus on. Teachers are working in their own classrooms. They're conducting research with their own students. I'll give you a moment just to look at all the methods there. You can also see the sample sizes vary significantly. But we only really here have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 longitudinal designs. And again, a lot of studies from 2000. Okay, so the last bunch of studies that we looked at was technology as a facilitator of curricular innovation. Oh. Again, we see quite a lot of studies in East Asia as well, and Europe. Sample sizes vary again, as do methods. I'll give you a moment just to look at these. And I can imagine in the last few years, there will have been a lot of studies in online contexts. So what we found when we looked at these studies was that some of them looked at how to facilitate alpha opportunities using technology, and others also looked at how to challenge students' perceptions using technology. So the aim of this study then was to challenge beliefs about native speaker norms. So we see a real similar thread here that assumptions on how English should be taught and learned, and also to broaden students' perspectives as well. The researchers here aimed to create an authentic online environment between students so that they could use English as a lingua franca. A number of different data collection techniques here, 58 Taiwanese students and 48 Indonesian students. The students did have a different proficiency, which may be an issue. And the study concluded here that this was a real effective to more positive attitudes towards self. So that's very promising. The next one is Bozoglan and to challenge attitudes toward Englishes. Every study's aim. And this study used WhatsApp for dialect awareness training, and they had 14 weekly sessions. So what I'm trying to show here is not give a summary of all the studies that were conducted, but just really pick out a few things that they're using different activity methods. They all have quite similar, but a lot of the quite similar as well. Again, we had different methods here. The claims were that the attitudes towards different varieties of English were found to become more positive. So that was a real positive finding here. And the authors suggest that awareness training could be more effective in improving tolerance of non-standard dialects in ELT. So they're calling for incorporation of awareness raising in mainstream ELTs then. There's many avenues for future research as well, but we're going to look at that into more detail. A lot of research has been done into teacher training programs, which is important given the increase in Global English's subject matter on applied linguistics and TESOL programs. We continue to see research innovation in the language classroom, predominantly action research questions. So teachers are doing research with their own students. This also has implications for teacher training. We need to ensure that our teachers are adequately trained for conducting these action research projects. So this has implications for research methods training on TESOL practitioner training programs. We see an increased research into technology. Obviously, we'll see much more. I need to get up to speed. I'm not even very good with Zoom. And however, we do need to focus on the strengths and the limitations of these research projects. And I hope that I've shown both the strengths, but also some of the limitations today as well. Future research agenda, well, section 7 of that article will be helpful as well. And I've given you the reference, but I will go into this in the next part of the lecture. So let's go into part 2 then. How are we doing for time? We're fine. So directing Global English's research then. Well, as Galloway here, sorry, pointed out back in 2014, this path from the traditional ELT to a GELT perspective in ELT requires a shift in materials design, views on ownership, cultures, norms, role models, as well as a change in English teachers. But this approach doesn't necessarily mean that teaching methods, ideology, language ideology, and recruitment. What this requires is a re-examination of the E in ELT in light of the changes in the use of English. So is this possible then to exist? We've seen, for as Kirkpatrick points out, the growing evidence base in global Englishes has significant implications for ELT, for language learning goals, teachers, and for the curriculum. The linguistic, cultural, and functional diversity associated with English challenges some of the fundamental assumptions underpinning the field of TESOL. And we need to revisit our pedagogical practices, especially if the needs of our students are to use English as a lingua franca. I've used these quotes for a number of years. They're old, but I still come back to them because I really like them and I think they're quite powerful as well. And they also cover different aspects of what we need to focus on. The unquestioned assumption. Now, I would say it is being increasingly questioned, but still we don't see a lot of change. The unquestioned assumption that the language norm practices associated with the native speaker varieties should be regarded as automatic. I think I lost. Is everybody still there?
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Prof, can you hear us?
Good. So it's
Yusuf?
important. Are we okay? You can hear me?
Yes.
Good. Good. Okay.
The signal is not
Yes.
good.
Okay. It's important to reflect on your own contexts. If the signal isn't good, could someone just interrupt me and tell me? I'm not sure. If the signal isn't good, please do let me know. Important to reflect on your own contexts. So, what areas need to be explored then? So the main conclusions from this systematic review are that we need more research into the effects of classroom interventions. We see that a lot of interventions are taking place and a lot of teachers are doing research in their classrooms, but they're not writing it up. Teachers are very busy as well. They don't have time to write research articles, or they're publishing it elsewhere at conferences, for example. So I really feel that researchers and teachers, we need to bridge this gap and work together to showcase the valuable research that our teachers are doing as well. We need to make convincing arguments. Now, this is Roger's terms here, the relative advantage of the proposed innovation. If we want to make a convincing argument that GELT is the way forward, then we need strong research to back this up. Teachers are experts in their own contexts. We need to work with them as well. And we also need to allow people to test the triability, so to try out these ideas in their classrooms as well and report on how effective they are or how they think these can be proposed in their classrooms. We need more research on compatibility as well. So how compatible are these frameworks in different contexts? We need more work on technology, as well as looking at the complexity of these innovations. And we really need to share research, and I'll come back to that when I talk about the network. So we need to increase the observability of our research. Teachers don't have time to read our long academic books or journal articles as well. So how can we increase the impact and the pedagogical uptake of our research? How can we make our research in this area more accessible to teachers as well? How can we communicate our research to a non-academic audience, materials writers, policymakers as well? And I think this is really needed in the field of global Englishes. A number of research questions need to be asked here. I'll give you a moment just to look over these. Now, for those of you in the audience that are students or PhD students or writing a grant proposal or thinking about a study, it can be helpful to look in articles such as a systematic review. What calls are being made for future research? What research questions need to be addressed? And this can improve the rationale for your own study as well, that there's been a call for research of this kind. So that's why I wanted to present these research questions. You may also want to look at special issues in our leading journals. So we have one recently, a a call for abstracts for special issues on global Englishes here. So Heath and Jim are the guest editors here. I have a conceptual piece on defining global Englishes. And some of the areas that they wanted to focus on were based on the systematic review. They didn't get as many submissions in those areas that they had hoped for. So we still have this gap in the research areas that need to be explored. But you can see here that they were calling for more empirical research that reported on pedagogical innovations. They wanted
Actually,
empirical,
yeah.
sorry?
I sent two proposal with my teams to this call for abstract.
Oh,
And
you said please introduce. Yeah, please introduce. Thank you.
just yeah, because I work with Professor Will Baker and the Fan Fang, so we produced two abstract and two proposal actually, and we have submitted to this call, and both of them were accepted. But by the end,
Wow.
but by the end of the journey, we not sure if our full manuscript will be accepted for this special issue or not. Hopefully.
Congratulations. So too, it was
Thank
very
you.
competitive. They were inundated with abstracts. Well done. Oh, that's great to hear. I look forward to reading it. But so I think that the fact that we have a special issue call in TESOL Quarterly and Global Englishes really shows that this is a flourishing and growing field of research, and that research is really needed in these areas. So I would encourage you to look at special issue calls in journals as well. So I'm going to put you in breakout rooms. So please take a picture of this page, because when you go into your breakout room, this slide will disappear. You can see that I'm using Heath, Mona and Aya's book here again. I wanted to use Aya's book because she's from the Thai context. So this is from chapter 9, a pre-reading activity that they have here. So what I'd want you to do is this chapter in their book that I think will be helpful if you're interested in the topic of research in global Englishes focuses on research. And think about the topics that need to be researched. So I've presented lots of them today in the research questions, and the methods that could be used. What type of data could be collected from these activities to show their effects on learners or learning? And there's some discussion questions here. So is there a difference between research-informed teaching? We hear this a lot, that our teaching has to be research-informed, and teaching-informed research. So have a think about this. And if so, how are they different? Often teachers are busy people that don't have the time for research, nor is it as important for their professional careers. In the UK, we have the REF, the Research Excellence Framework. I'm the head of publications, so I have to focus on the REF. I take my colleagues on writing retreats to improve the quality of their publications. We have to aim for 3- and 4-star publications. What does that mean? And we assess where we are now. That's what I'll be doing this afternoon after I finish the workshop. In what ways can we encourage more research on classroom-based practices? And how do you respond to the following criticism? Research on single classrooms is not useful, as each classroom and the individuals within them are different. Thus, the findings of one classroom that EIL activities were successful cannot be used to draw conclusions that these activities would work in other classrooms. Now, this relates to some of the studies in the systematic review that they were on single classrooms. So can we really generalize the findings of these studies to other contexts? So I'm going to stop sharing now and put you in breakout rooms. You thought you were just coming along to listen. And I'm actually going to put you in for 10 minutes. Let's see if this works, because yesterday, did everybody take a picture? Yeah, good. Thank you. I like the thumbs up. That's really helpful. all the rooms are open now. My stomach's rumbling. I don't think the banana was enough. The breakout rooms seem to be working fine. Yesterday we had a bit of a... Yeah, everybody's going in now.
Maybe you can try your banana and a piece of bread for tomorrow to make sure.
My dog's been very good. She's next to me. I've got a big black Labrador, so she's been very quiet.
Yeah. Actually, last February, myself and my team, we went to Southampton University to present our project with Professor Wilbeck, because we got some funded from British Council. Yeah, actually, I mean, if we have enough time, we planning to go up to the north, to the Edinburgh.
Oh,
Yeah.
Come next time.
This time, yeah. Because my visa is still active, so it's better to go.
Scotland's beautiful. Have you never been?
Once when I was in Southampton once. Very nice, yeah.
Yeah, I like it.
I think you are going to be invited as the reviewer of the, TESOL quarterly special issue, I guess.
I don't know actually, because I was invited to write the article, so I'm not sure if I'm not sure if there's a conflict of interest. Good for you though, 2 articles, that's good. Oh, there's still some people here in the main room. If everybody joins their breakout room. I like this activity actually. I only found it when I was preparing on Sunday for I was just tidying up the lectures, and I thought it's quite a nice discussion activity about thinking about teachers and still got people in the main room.
How many breakout rooms do you have? 15 rooms, right?
Yeah, I wanted to keep them quite small.
Excuse me, I'm from breakout room 12, and I need help. What are we supposed to do? I'm sorry because on that time I cannot hear well.
Did you take a photo of the activity?
Oh, not yet. Please, can you put it in chat or something?
I can share the screen again. Here you go. So if you take a photo.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm gonna leave to my room.
Maybe some people don't want to join the room. That's fair enough.
Hello.
Hello, yes.
I just reconnect, so I cannot join the breakout room.
Let me put you in a room now. Anissa. I put you in room 2. Yusuf, it might be good if I do come later in the year, so that the trip was supposed to be July, but I've got the Introducing Global English, the 2nd edition is due in October, so I think I need to, and it's quite late, so I need to really focus and I think just delay travel. So I'm hoping maybe November or December, but maybe we could.
You mean this year, right?
Yeah, so maybe we could think about a continuation of the research aspect of this and maybe some activities to foster.
Yeah. Actually, if you want, like when Will Baker, visited to my university, I have organized the I have organized the session for Will Baker about 3 hours or more if you want to, to introduce the research project. And I'm many university, in the southern of Thailand, about 6 or 7 university, including student and teacher, were invited to join in the session. Yeah, in that case, I mean, we can do something similar, introduce, our global Englishes concept, research related to global Englishes to, to university students, or maybe we can design some kinds of activities.
That would be great.
And, and then we can try those activities with the teacher and student, during that 3 hours or 6 hours, I mean, I can manage that. I mean, if you would like to, yeah, we can
Yeah,
discuss
no,
more in
that's
detail after this.
great.
Yeah. Because there are many, there are many studies, already, have been conducted regarding global Englishes, but most of them are only related to theoretical framework and a superficial level. They are still, insufficient in terms of, practical activities, how to develop the awareness of the student, towards global Englishes.
Yeah, we need more work. Someone
And
else is.
yeah, and I'm now working on the global Englishes with the high school student in the southern, of Thailand, actually. Yeah,
Oh,
I
are
just
you?
funding from Thai government. And that they are
You're
research.
very busy.
Yeah.
What is it like to get funding in Thailand?
It's not such, it depends actually. I mean, there are, there are many factors, will be, if either you will be able to get this funding or not. Normally the committee will look on your background experience. If you have lots of publication, for example, this can be one of the main factors, because they will assume that, okay, because you have lots of publication, so there's a high possibility that you will be able to complete this project. So this can be one thing that one factor that you will get, I mean, the funding or not. And another one, it depends, if your research project is somehow very trendy and play a great role and great impact in terms of policy, for example. This can be another issue that, I mean, you will be able to, to get funding or not from Thai government. And of course, based on the concept of global initiative, which is very new. So it's a kind of, something very exciting to do actually in Thailand. Yeah, because there are not so many studies conducted regarding, global English, especially in terms of the private, like a high school student, for example. Another issue which is conducted this study with the international English teacher, who teaching English in Thailand, to see how do they perceive, the concept of global Englishes, or how do they perceive when, in terms of Thai English, for example. That's can be another issue, which is I think very, very interesting to try to investigate. I mean, their perception, because most of the paper they just conducted with Thai teachers, Thai students, Thai learners, but not to those foreign lecturers who are teaching English in Thailand.
That's good you're doing work with high school students.
Yeah, I think I'm quite agree, try to conduct some study with high school students, start at very young age and to see, but actually it's not only the student, but also their teachers and the administrators, because these three stakeholders, they are linked to one another. If we want to increase the awareness or do some kinds of, changing the attitudes, maybe we have to try to study with those three, stakeholders, and try to figure out how their perception are linked to one another.
I look forward to you writing up your findings.
Yeah, let's see, because my participants, I mean, there are three group of participants: teachers and students, and also administrators. Yeah,
Well,
and
that's
of
good.
course
So administrators as well.
yeah. And of course, I will analyze my finding based on your framework, that you presented yesterday. Yeah, there's about
Oh,
8
great.
Yeah, I make comparison between traditional ALT and GALT. How do they perceive traditional ALT and how do they perceive GALT? I also do some kinds of training session with students regarding global English activities and to see pre and post, perceptions before they attending the activities and after they attending the activities. How do they perceive regarding global
So you're
English?
doing everything. You're basically doing everything that I've called for today. So the need for work with the frameworks, the need for work with younger learners,
Yeah.
and the need for pre and post tests.
Mm.
Oh, that's
That's very
great.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's not enough work being done with the framework. I always tell my students when I'm presenting them as well, be critical of these frameworks because, there hasn't been research conducted with them. I've closed the breakout rooms to bring everyone back.
Yes.
20 seconds. Okay, everyone, welcome back. So I hope that you all managed to have a good discussion in your breakout rooms. I just thought it was important for us to stop and have a chat because you've been listening for an hour, but also just to think about this idea of teaching-informed research. And I think this is really key for us in TESOL in general, but particularly in global Englishes as well. I was very concerned when I left Japan and first of all went to the University of Edinburgh, now Glasgow, to become quite disengaged with classroom practice. And I really want to work with my students when they go back as well to their home context. And we can learn a lot from our students as well about their context. And they are the ones that are in the classrooms teaching and working with the curricula as well. So I think when we're thinking about curriculum innovation and proposing change as well, we have to work so closely with teachers, and we have to think about how we can encourage our teachers to do more research and classroom-based practices, how we can equip them with those skills, and how we can really showcase that the valuable research that they're doing as well, and how we as academics perhaps can guide that as well and work with them. Another important point when we're thinking about curriculum innovation is now I started to explore general education innovation theory as well. And I really like this book, Rogers 2003, Diffusions of Innovation. And he comes up with 5 factors that are important when you want to introduce something new. The first one is the relative advantage. How can we show that this approach to teaching is more beneficial than the traditional approach? Compatibility. How can we ensure that this is compatible with existing belief systems, curricula, institutional structures, language policies? Complexity. How can we ensure that we're making this relatively straightforward for our teachers to introduce? So quite often I get questions when we're talking about viewing English as fluid and dynamic and changeable. Well, how do I present that to my learners? What examples do I give in textbooks? So we need to think about the complexity of all of this as well. Tests as well. It's much easier to test our students according to a big list of grammatical norms based on native standards. It's much more complex if we want to test their abilities to use English as a lingua franca and communication strategies. So we need to think about this. Triability. We don't just want to hand something over and say, implement this. Are we going to give people a way to adapt it, to try it out and adapt it to their context? And also observability. Are our research findings easily observable? And this relates to my point about making our research in this area more accessible to our teachers as well. And I'll come back to that with the network. So getting a new idea adopted, even when it has obvious advantages, is difficult. People are often reluctant to change. Many innovations require a lengthy period of many years, from the time when they become available to the time when they become adopted. We saw in yesterday's lecture that we've had calls for change back to, the 1960s. We're now 2023. However, recent years have seen an increased number of studies reporting on innovations with regards to global Englishes. It is important, though, when we're thinking about research and also curriculum innovation, to think about the number of barriers. So when I came up with the GILT proposals back in 2011, I also looked at the number of barriers that were being discussed in the literature as well. And I identified 6 main barriers at the time: a lack of materials for teaching global Englishes, attachments to this idea that there's a standard English, the publishing industry, it's a money-making industry, traditional curricula and ELT, assessment, and hiring practices as well. So we need to consider the barriers that we face. Perhaps another barrier is the number of terms: global Englishes, translanguaging, multilingualism, EIL, world Englishes, elfin-forward pedagogy. Which one do I use? But as Matsuda points out, and as what I've tried to point out at the start of today's lecture and also yesterday, is that each of these different names indicate a different intellectual history and affiliation, but they're more similar to each other than their different assumptions, visions, and suggested practice. They have a shared, similar underlying ideology. It's also important with our research that we're looking to inform and develop, not dictate and demand. And this relates to a point with Larson, Freeman and Anderson made back in 2013, when they gave an overview of techniques and principles in language teaching. They noted, we do not seek to convince readers that one method is superior to another, or that there is or ever will be a perfect method to teaching English. And I think that's really important here when we're proposing Global English's language teaching as well. We're not seeking to convince people that they have to do this, or that this is the way that you do it as well. It's about raising awareness as well and offering more choice. So let's look, in order to guide the Global English's research, I think that we need more research into the innovation process. But we have a lot of research on attitudes to global Englishes, attitudes to change, a lot of classroom intervention studies now, a lot of studies with teacher education. But I think we need to go beyond this and look at how to innovate curricula and do research in this aspect. This model looks a lot more frightening than it is intended to be, but you may want to be critical of this. So Heath and I came up with this curriculum innovation model that we hoped would guide the process of curriculum innovation, but also guide research. So you can see here that there's different phases. First of all, knowledge of innovation, raise awareness of global Englishes. What does it mean? Then there may be a decision to adopt. So that's phase 1. A decision is made to adopt this. Then the next phase is implementing it. So we start to try and integrate this into the curriculum. And then the third phase is the ultimate goal. This is institutionalization. This is when it's no longer new, it's just a part of the curriculum. But this last phase may appear last chronologically, but it's important to do research at this last stage first. This is where we look at the context, the resources, the attitudes, the potential barriers. How likely is this to survive in this context? The model also aims to show that the innovation, so Geld, could be rejected at any stage in this process. And we need research on all of these stages. Why was it rejected? What happened? Okay, what can we learn from this? We've also put reinvention here. And this relates to my point about allowing people to adapt and change things. So Geld may look very different in one context to another. So how are people adapting these ideas to their context? We also have the people involved, the innovator, the early adopter, the early majority, the late majority, the laggard. All of this is explained in Rose and Galloway. But we also encourage researchers to look at all the factors influencing the innovation process as well. And hopefully this framework can guide research in this area by things to consider, such as teachers' qualifications. What about previous innovations? Have previous innovations been introduced in your context? And what was the process as well? Stakeholder beliefs, attachments to standard language ideology, openness to change, teacher training. All of this is important. So I would like to see more research looking at this process in how to, we have research on how to introduce it, its effects on students perhaps, but really we also need to look at the long-term implementation of global Englishes. I really hope this framework doesn't look too complicated. So, if you think about language teacher education then, how would you work with your future colleagues? Are you doing research in your classroom? Can you work together? What about in a language classroom? If you're a language teacher, will you have the opportunity to conduct research with your own students? Action research projects. Will you write this up? Will you publish it? Will you communicate your findings? Could you work with another researcher to help guide this work? This is just some classroom activities that I did when I was a teacher back in Japan. Seems like such a long way. It's nice to see some of my students here. I used a presentation task here. So students were presenting a variety of English, and I analysed the results. Exposure resulted in a deeper understanding of why variation existed. And then I was a teacher at the time. This was part of my PhD, but not part of the research. And it wasn't until 7 or 8 years later that I published this with my colleague Heath. We revisited a lot of the data that I collected at the time when I was a teacher, but also a full-time student, no time to write this up. And then we published this, I think this was the RELC journal as well. So you can also come back to your findings later. I don't think I published for my PhD for about 8 years. I couldn't bear to look at the thing after graduating. This was another activity that I did with my students, and I didn't publish until 9 years after the PhD. So this was a poem activity. The page has gone a little strange here. So this was in a writing class and introduced students to metaphors and similes. And they wrote poems. So, dear inner circle, my English is samurai, my English is sushi, my English is sumo, my English is Tokyo. I'm not going to follow your English, okay? My English is Jinglish. I like this. English, the virus, quite interesting now. I think English is like a virus, not a bad virus. It's kind of good virus. It's spread all over the world. If someone begin to speak English, other people begin to speak it. It's like a virus, and I will be infected person. And I have a couple of more here. Japanese English is like penguins. It's surely English, but a little strange. Penguins are certainly birds, but can't fly. One difference is penguins can go to other countries, but Japanese English can't. So this was a very simple activity, but it allowed me to explore my students' attitudes to English as well. And it was a nice activity. And then later, when I was working with another academic at Edinburgh, Claudia was an English literature major as well, and very interested in corpus and literary analysis. And she analysed the data to explore these metaphors as well. So I think it's good to always be collecting data as well, even if we can't publish it at the time. So that's the point I want to make there. This was also the listening journals, and I mentioned earlier that there were handwritten journals. Again, quite a simple activity. You may also want to look at direct instruction. I don't know if you have the opportunity to introduce an entire Global Englishes course. So I've introduced one at Glasgow. I have a Teaching English as an International Language course. Unfortunately, I haven't collected pre and post course data. I wanted to do a replication study of the TESOL quarterly article, but I'm busy. So I think our teachers are very busy as well, but also as academics, we also take on a lot more admin responsibilities as well. So I think we need to think about this, that there's opportunities that we can be collecting data on an ongoing basis. And I have missed an opportunity here with my courses that I'm teaching at the moment. Technology as well. So I've been introduced in quite a lot of MOOCs recently. I did 2 for the University of Tokyo. I've given you one of the websites here. One of them was on EMI, so for professional development in the university, and the other one was on Global Englishes for EMI as well. I've also just recently completed a MOOC with colleagues in Indonesia as well for EMI and EAP teachers working in the context. We saw in the report of studies on technology that one of the techniques used was forum analysis of the MOOC. So that's another way to generate data. So looking at user statistics, but also looking at the forums as well. I haven't done that. Another missed opportunity to collect data with my MOOCs, but hopefully I'll do that soon. Yusuf mentioned that he is doing work, applying these frameworks as well, so that's great. And I mentioned at the start, or in part 2 of the talk, that I think that we need more research looking at the usefulness of these frameworks that scholars have been producing. Is anyone using these frameworks to evaluate their curricula and design curricula? As I mentioned yesterday, this is the Global Englishes language teaching framework. We aimed for this to help teachers or curriculum developers evaluate curricula and also design curricula, also to evaluate materials as well, and through a Global Englishes lens. Is it helpful? Do they find this a useful way to evaluate and design their curricula? Can this framework guide research? I don't know. I would hope so, but I don't know. We also aimed to break this framework down, looking at the different curriculum elements as well, the 6 elements of the curriculum. Do teachers find this helpful? Is this helping them to instigate change in their classrooms? So just to conclude then, I'm quite surprised we've managed this in nice time. Think about what is your perspective on all of this and your perspective on the future of Global Englishes in TESOL. We see in TESOL Quarterly a special issue looking at Global Englishes. I've given evidence today that this really is a growing field as well. And what do you think will be the future directions for Global Englishes as a subfield of applied linguistics? There's a real need for ELT curricula today that recognises the role of English as a global language. The evidence is there. We have this huge evidence base now, and a lot of work now done on the pedagogical implications and classroom practice, teacher education. But the curricula continues to be misaligned. We still have this mismatch between how our students are using English and what we're presenting to them in the classroom. We've had a lot of work, as I mentioned yesterday, in terms of recruitment as well, and trying to move away from this focus on the native speaker. But as I mentioned, with the growth of EMI, which I'll talk about tomorrow, we perhaps see this re-emerging as well. I recently, this isn't a rigorous research study, it was a look at job advertisements in the field of EMI, and I found that 26 positions required native or native-like proficiency in English. So we've got all this work in the field of TESOL where we've been battling against this, and now we have this really rapidly growing momentum of EMI in higher education. And we do see articles being published now on the relevance of a global English East perspective for EMI as well. So, and I'll come back to that later. I mentioned also that we may need to think about the number of terms in the different research paradigms. And even though I have defined global English East as an inclusive umbrella paradigm, we do see articles here from the field of world Englishes and global Englishes competing or complementary paradigms. And I think you might find that an interesting read as well. So global English scholars have aimed to showcase the importance of world English research, but this article would suggest perhaps otherwise. In our upcoming new, very first ever Routledge Handbook of Teaching English as an International Language, we have about 37 chapters, maybe. So I'm editing this with my colleague Ali Fouad Selvi. And our last section aims to direct research in the field as well. So I hope that this will be a useful text. And we have a number of contributors in all of the 37 chapters. I know you're not students, all of you, but just in case you're interested, this is some recommended reading based on the topic of today's lecture or talk. I also think you might find this article by Aya on teacher cognition as well quite interesting. So I've put the YouTube link here. This was actually at our first network conference. So the network that I mentioned yesterday is ELINET, Education, Language and Internationalization Network. We are launching, we go live at the end of the week. So please do take a note of the website address, sign up as a member. This is our attempt at creating an online community of practice in this field to nurture our growing number of early career researchers. So we have an advisory panel of leading scholars. We're going to do workshops on research methods. We've got a podcast series, video interviews, abstract summaries of research articles, and we want to use this as a platform to work with teachers as well to facilitate collaborative research. We have overviews of our research projects and publications. We share our data collection instruments on the network, so to encourage replication studies. In some cases, researchers will share the raw data as well, so you can add to data sets. But we've been working on this in the background for about 4 years now. We have a Thai team as well. Assoc is in the Thai team. And we launch with our first annual conference in mid-April with an online conference on the 15th. So you can still sign up for this. And we'll be presenting the network there and a number of different talks as well. So yeah, please do get involved. I was recently at the RELC conference and the Minister of Education noted the importance of communities of practice and that this is an important way to network beyond the conference. And this was one of the very reasons I set ELINET up, is that constantly getting emails after conferences or emails from people that they're interested in global Englishes or they want help with their research study. And so really, I wanted to build this online global community. We have, I think, 700 members at the moment, lots of different LANet branches, and facilitate different communities of practice and context as well. So I do hope that you'll get involved and we'll be able to continue this conversation on research and global Englishes on the network. That's 9:30. Thank you very much for listening. I think we'll stop for questions now. Thank you.
So on behalf of all participants, I would like to thank you, Associate Professor Dr. Nicola Galloway, for her insightful and interesting talk. Okay, so as we can see, global Englishes is an academic field of research in applied linguistics. Yeah, Dr. Nicola walked us through some study that showcase the classroom activities informed by global Englishes and the study that look at the impact of global Englishes on attitude change. Yeah, and if you want to see the positive change, maybe we should focus on teaching informed research, working closely to the teacher, and also view global Englishes as an innovation and understand the innovation process. And she also told us about the future direction. For example, there should be more study that use longitudinal design and PM protest, for example. So it's quite interesting and quite useful for us all. Okay, so now we are going to continue with the Q&A session. So if you have any question, you can ask Dr. Nicola directly, or you can send the question in the chat box. Okay, thank you. Any question? One participant said it is possible to have the PowerPoint presentation from yesterday and today.
Yes, I'm happy to share everything. Yusuf actually asked me yesterday, but I was busy after, so I'll package everything together and I'll send that on, but very, very happy to share the slides. Yes.
Thank you so much. Okay, any question from the audience?
From your presentation, it can be clearly seen that one of the main obstacles that educational practitioners like English teachers or policymakers is not able to integrate or implement the concept of global Englishes in ELT classroom practices because of the assessment. They may have no idea how to assess the English language proficiency of their learners if they really want to apply the concept of global Englishes into LT teaching practices. As you are the expert of the global Englishes, could you please provide us some kinds of suggestion or recommendation? How can we, assess or evaluate the English language proficiencies of our learners based on the perspective of the global Englishes concept? Thank you.
Yeah, I think assessment is definitely one of the main barriers, and it was one of the reasons that we wanted. So we have the British Council assessment team will contribute to the Routledge Handbook as well, a chapter, and we've indicated some reading there as well that we do see research being undertaken in looking at this, but it really we need to re-examine how we view proficiency and competency now in English. And I would say that shouldn't equate to being able to adhere to an outdated, static native norm, but competency and proficiency in English as a global language needs to be being a proficient ELF user as well. I know easier said than done because we have resources. And so again, I think that we need to look at this curriculum innovation model and think about all of the factors. So that kind of testing format is a lot more complicated and a lot more expensive as well. But we see changes now in the CEFR, they're taking away the mention of native, but still not enough. These are token gestures, really, and we need a lot more work done. But again, like the ELT industry, it's a money-making industry. These large-scale proficiency tests now do include some variation in English, but still we're assessing our students on native norms. So yes, I don't have the answers. It is a barrier. And I think that if we look in China, for example, the Gaokao and again, I think that it relates to the comment yesterday that's really resonated with me about reaching other stakeholders as well, and raising awareness beyond academia as well. And I hope, I might be being overly optimistic about the network. I do hope it's going to provide a forum for us to come together and discuss these issues as well, and problematize these issues, but definitely more work is needed in assessment.
Thank you.
So talking about assessment, if I'm not sure about the grammar point, I can look at the resources, the dictionary and everything, right? Do you think will it be possible to have the dictionary of, English or lingua franca, where you can look whether would that be a resources like that in the future, you think?
I would say no. I would say that we need to move away from this idea of, and even when I was presenting the developments in ELF research yesterday, we saw that early ELF research work was describing and used words such as core, but then we saw a movement more towards looking at the underlying processes behind this. And what we see is that English is dynamic and fluid and it changes. So our users are creative with the language depending on the situation. They're playful with the rules. They use translanguaging as well. So I think that having a dictionary, we're going back to the idea of quite a static view of language as well. And with translanguaging, we see that the boundaries are very blurred now around languages as well. But I know, what does that mean then for a grammar test? Or what does that mean for the types of examples that we show in our textbooks? And I think that for a while, teachers will continue to have to present rules as we know them, but encourage students to be aware that this is only one way as well, and that actually when English is used, it's used in very different ways as well.
Thank you so much. Is there any other question?
Languaging test look like?
Any more questions from the audience? Any more question?
Maybe just a short question then. We have been a study, data, we have been conducted many study with the teachers and learners, and some of them might less or more change their attitudes or perception, beliefs towards the global Englishes, global Englishes. However, in terms of the policymakers or curriculum designer, we have more powers in terms of how English should be taught or learned in the country. Do you think is that easy, or how hard is it to change the attitude of those groups of people who play as a crucial role, how to drive ELT in one particular country, for example Thailand?
Yeah, I know that, in academia, I mentioned yesterday, this impact is now this big buzzword as well, and we have to think about the impact of our research beyond academia as well. And we see when we're applying for funding as well, we have to explore how we will engage the end users from the start of our projects. And I think all of this is helpful. This is quite new for me. I've only started thinking of this in the last couple of years as well, but thinking about who all of the stakeholders are as well in the innovation process. And parents, I mentioned yesterday, materials writers, administrators, there's a lot of people to consider here. And I think that we have only really focused on teachers and students at present, and we do need to involve a number of other stakeholders. A lot of researchers do have opportunities now to present to ministries of education and policymakers. So I've been involved quite a lot for English medium instruction as well. So that's quite a good opportunity when you are presenting about EMI, for example, to bring in the global English's perspective there as well, and to talk about the disadvantages of EMI, for example, and having this global perspective of language. So I think that when we do have opportunities to talk to those audiences, it's important really to showcase this work as well. But yes, I would say that we need to explore how to get these different stakeholders together more. Jacinta?
So there is one question from the text box. Do you think there could be another term after translanguaging? Recently, I read an article that referred to English as the cultural language. Or
Well, so in the new Routledge Handbook, Dr. Will Baker from the University of Southampton has written an article on this, a chapter on this topic, and what he's defined as TELT. So transcultural, is it transcultural English language teaching, Yusuf? Is that correct? Correct? TELT. So I think that, yeah, we've seen this focus now, you know, from intercultural to transcultural as well. So, but this is academia. People have their own terminology, and I think this is always the case that we're always going to have these new terms as well. I think you've got your hand up there, Valentin.
Yeah. Actually, I've been interested in those terms, and recently I read the article about English as an intercultural language, and they were arguing that the focus would be on, again, projecting different cultural identities, and people will shift between lots of languages. So it would be not even 2 languages, but more languages. And they were also arguing that the contact zones would change. And the focus, yes, the focus would still be on meaning, but there will be different multilingual shifts and different changes in terms of how people communicate meaning.
Yeah, I think you would find Will Baker's work on this interesting as well, when he's built on Mike Byram's notion of intercultural competence and the framework, was it the ICA framework, and now his notion of transcultural competence as well. And so if we look at this in terms of culture, so transculturalism, and then language, translanguaging as well. So we've definitely seen this move to work from multilingualism or interculturalism now towards this notion of trans as well, and that things are more blended now as well. But we do have to think about the implications of this for, like we say, assessment as well.
So I have one question. When you talk about the impact of global English on attitude, right? The findings seem to be mixed. There are some positive results, you know. So do we know the factors that lead to the attitude change in the study that show the positive result? Do we know what factor that caused the attitude?
I would say that some of the claims being made in some of the studies perhaps are not overly reliable as well because of the methods used, or maybe are not generalizable to other findings as well. What they have indicated to us is the types of activities that we can introduce in our classes and the types of methods that we can use to research this. But I think that some of the studies did reveal positive attitudes. So some of the activities that I showed today did have a positive influence, but I would say that these studies need to be conducted in multiple contexts as well. So we need replication studies as well. There's a real need for replication studies.
So any more questions? If not, then could the participant kindly fill out the evaluation form. Okay, so the link is in the chat box. Yeah, can you please do that so that we know that where to improve? Okay, thank you so much. The evaluation link is in the chat box. Okay, also allow me to remind you that there will be another interesting sessions by Associate Professor Dr. Nicola Galloway on 29 March. Okay, so the topic will be on English medium instruction. Okay, so do not miss out. So actually we have two events here. So the one that I'm showing here is on the 29 March. Okay, and then there is another event on the 30th. Yeah. So let me show you the poster of another event. Okay.
You've got me all week.
Yes. Fully booked for the whole week.
The focus will be very different, yes. So on the growing global phenomenon of English medium instruction, but with a focus on the impact of this on TESOL as well. Another popular topic just now, isn't it? Mm.
And here, another session, which will be on the 30th March. Okay, so it's on researching English medium instruction. Yeah? Okay, so do stay tuned. Yeah.
I also send you on the link of the for registration for those two sessions in the chat box.
Yes.
Mhm. Actually, the concept of the English medium instruction in Thailand is still debatable among these educational stakeholders as well. Yeah, some people agree, to use only English in the classroom, while some, may disagree about this. So it's good for you. I mean, it's good for us. I mean, to have a chance to discuss with you for the next 2 days regarding this particular notion, to see advantages and disadvantages, of, using English solely or,
Mm. Change topics tomorrow.
Yeah. I think both the EMI and the translanguaging, both of them are very trendy at the moment in ART communities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, for those who want a certificate for today's session, yeah, you can fill out the link as well. So we will send the link.
Yeah,
if you want the certificate, yeah. So here's the certificate link.
Of course, Professor, I will send you those posters via email later after this.
Thank you.
So make sure you have more than a banana tomorrow, okay?
Well, I will.
Huh. And anything would you like to say, Professor Nicholas Galloway, before we finish the session today?
No, thank you very much for coming along, and yeah, please do join the network and we can continue the discussions. I think it's important for us to have a Thai community as well. We've got Elinet Thailand, and
Yeah.
hopefully with the Thai team we'll be able to organize some events as well, and
Conference maybe, yeah, in the future.
in the future. And I'll see you all tomorrow if you're coming.
Yes, you are, for sure. And the moderator for tomorrow is here too. Yes, Faiza, would you like to say something for tomorrow?
Yes, of course. I would like to call upon all of you to be with us for tomorrow's session. It will be as fascinating as today, for sure. Yeah, welcome to tomorrow's session, then EMI with the impact on the ELT. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your nice introduction. So today is just for your appetizer, right? Your main course will come tomorrow, right? Okay, Ajahn Parivat, maybe it's time to close the session, I guess.
Okay, so thank you everyone for your attention. Okay, so we will see you again tomorrow. So do stay tuned.
Okay,
See you
thank you very
tomorrow.
much. Yeah,
Yeah,
see you
thank
tomorrow.
you.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Hope to see you again tomorrow. Have a nice day. Have a nice day.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day, Prof.
Yes, have a great day, everyone.